It is 2 in the morning. The temperature has dropped to -8 degrees Celsius, but with the wind gusting at over 70 kilometers per hour, what you feel on your skin is closer to -20 degrees. You're standing near the summit of the highest mountain in Austria. You are exhausted. You can barely lift your legs. Your hands are losing feeling. And somewhere above you is the man you love. Except he's not up there anymore. He's gone. And you are alone. Kerstin Gurtner was 33 years old. She was fit, adventurous, passionate about the outdoors. She had summited mountains more difficult than this one. She had no reason to believe that a night on the Grossglockner would be her last. But on the morning of January 19th, 2025, her body was found just 50 meters below the summit. She had died of hypothermia, frozen to death in the dark, while the man who had brought her there descended the mountain without her. In February of 2026, an Austrian court delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves throughout the international mountaineering community. And the more that you learn about this case, the details, the lies, the secret past, the more fascinating it becomes. And now stay with me, because what his ex-girlfriend told the court changes everything about this story. So I hope you'll let me take just a little bit of a breather so I can tell you about the sponsor of today's video, MyHeritage. All of us wonder where we really came from once in a while, right? My dad always used to say that we were at least 50% Irish, but as I started going through MyHeritage, it turns out that I have living relatives in Sweden, and I have some Viking in my blood. Maybe that's where I got my thirst for exploration. So let me forewarn you, once you check out MyHeritage, you're going to go back generations of your story, about people who made it possible for you to even exist. You can search 36 billion historical documents on MyHeritage to find records of your family members. Start by filling in a couple generations or anything that you know, and suddenly MyHeritage starts to open the doors, going back sometimes hundreds of years. It's actually mind-blowing. I've heard stories of people going back 1,000 years. And MyHeritage makes it easy. They use AI technology to unlock links to your past, saving you literally a lifetime of detective work. And this is amazing. You can colorize old photographs, even animate them. It is pretty wild to see someone who's been gone for decades or over 100 years looking back through the lens of time right at you. One thing I found out was that my great-grandfather came over to the United States from Sweden through Ellis Island. And he ended up in Connecticut, and there's an instant discovery feature that does all the work for you. MyHeritage is offering a 14-day free trial. You can't beat it. It gives you the opportunity to go under the hood, to look into your past. There's a link in my description and in the pinned comment, or use the QR code on the screen right now so you can open up your past with MyHeritage. Click on the link and you'll get 14 days of a free trial, but you won't want to stop there. It is a rabbit hole that will take you into places that you never even dreamed of. You know, sometimes I wonder if anybody watching today's video might be related to George Mallory or Sandy Irvin. Can you imagine? That would be pretty fascinating. So to understand what happened on the mountain, you need to understand who these two people were and how they ended up there together. Thomas Plamberger was 36 years old at the time of the climb. He worked as a chef in Salzburg. By all accounts, he was charismatic, physically strong, deeply passionate about the mountains He wasn't a professional guide, but he was, by any reasonable measure, a highly experienced alpinist. He had done technically demanding routes before, and he knew what real danger in the Alps looked like. Kerstin Gurtner was athletic, enthusiastic, and no stranger to the outdoors. She had completed mountain runs and had reached difficult summits herself. Her family, her parents, her mother, Gertrude, would later describe her as a strong, independent woman who would never have been led blindly into a dangerous situation. Now, the two of them had been dating for nearly a year, and by January of 2025, they were in that exciting, adventurous phase of the relationship, trying new things, bigger and higher mountains, doing things together, pushing boundaries, feeding off of each other's energy. And then Thomas had an idea. He wanted to climb the Grossglockner. The Grossglockner stands at 3,798 meters. That's just under 12,500 feet. It's Austria's highest peak, and in summer, experienced climbers go after it regularly. But Thomas didn't want to take the standard route. He wanted to climb it via the Studelgrat. It's a technically demanding ridgeline rated AD with sections of UIAA grade 3 and 4 climbing. So this was no walk-up, but certainly not one of the world's difficult climbs. And expert mountain guide Peter Suntinger, who has summited Grossglockner more than 200 times, he later said plainly, if you're not an absolute professional, you should only attempt the Studelgrat in winter with a qualified guide. Thomas Plamberger was not a qualified guide, and Kerstin had never completed a climb of this length, difficulty, or elevation in winter, but they planned the trip together, they packed their bags together, and January 18th, 2025, they began their fateful ascent together. The Innsbruck Regional Court would later reconstruct the timeline of that night in extraordinary detail through GPS tracking of their sports watches, phone records, photographs, webcam footage, and the testimony of 15 witnesses. What that evidence revealed is a story that unfolds in slow, creeping horror. On January 18th, the couple set out to climb Grossglockner via the southwestern ridge. They had planned to descend the normal route, so up and over the summit, return to their start point. 6:45 a.m., they parked and began hiking. And the ascent via the southwest ridge usually takes between 7 and 8 hours. Now, this was a winter ascent, so probably longer. They went very slowly, and they were still climbing the most difficult section of the ridge when night fell. So at 8:15 p.m., they were still ascending. Witnesses saw their headlamps on the upper section. Other mountaineers had already bailed on their climbs because of harsh winds, and so worried for the couple, witnesses called the Alpine police. The police then identified the two climbers by checking their car, and they called the couple's phones, but the calls went unanswered. At around 10:50 p.m., a police helicopter flew directly over them. I mean, directly overhead. In Thomas's own account, he could hear it and he could see it. Now get this, he did not signal for help, so the helicopter flew on. 2 hours later, the helicopter returned. Helicopter crew focused a light, shining it down on the couple, but again received no signal that they were in trouble. They continued ascending, and this was the last time that the helicopter could take off that day. And at midnight, the couple was 50 meters below the summit. Prosecutor's office, they established that he failed to activate any distress signal. He failed to use an emergency beacon, failed to flag down the helicopter that could have saved Kerstin's life. Instead, according to court documents, Thomas placed Kerstin's phone on silence. And police, they tried to contact Thomas multiple times that night. By then, Kerstin had been in the dark for hours. Exhausted, Kerstin could go no further. Thomas stayed at her side for a while, but soon after she asked him, word says, to look for help, and the couple didn't make any emergency calls. Thomas continued up and over the summit, immediately descended the normal route, and finally at 3:40 a.m. on January 19th, he reached a hut on the other side that's closed in the winter at 3,451 meters, and that's when he finally made the emergency call. At some time during their ascent, their rope became entangled, and according to the defense, this cost them 90 critical minutes. And remember, the ridge is very technical. It's pitch black. So an hour and a half is serious. Kerstin was struggling. She was completely exhausted, genuinely physically unable to continue moving upward. She was showing signs of hypothermia, confusion, weakness, inability to regulate her own warmth. This is absolutely life or death situation in the making. And then prosecutors would later allege that she may have also been suffering from viral pneumonia, an infection that would have dramatically worsened her body's ability to cope with the cold. This is just absolutely heartbreaking to imagine. And to the prosecution, Thomas had secured her to the rock with a rope, which sounds somewhat responsible if you're going to hustle down and endeavor to find rescuers until you hear what was found next to her body. This is almost too much to imagine. In Kerstin's backpack, still packed, still unused, were an emergency bivouac sleeping bag and aluminum foil blankets. These are items designed exactly for the scenario that she was in. Items that certainly could have kept her alive through the night. And Thomas, he told the court that he didn't have an explanation for why he had not wrapped her in that sleeping bag and those aluminum blankets. Kerstin Gurtner was found dead on the morning of January 19th. She had frozen to death alone in the dark, just 50 meters below the summit that she had come so far to reach. What followed was an 11-month investigation by the Innsbruck Public Prosecutor's Office, and it was thorough. They left no stone unturned. And because Innsbruck is surrounded by mountains, the regional court has something most courts don't: a specialized alpine prosecutor. And on December 4th, 2025, it was nearly a year after Kerstin's death, Thomas Plamberger was formally indicted for grossly negligent manslaughter. The prosecution didn't just allege one mistake. They weren't arguing he simply got in over his head either. They were arguing he was responsible for Kerstin's life and that he failed her at every critical moment. Among the breaches that they list are proceeding with the climb despite Kerstin's lack of winter high alpine experience at this level, failing to turn back when conditions worsened, failing to signal the helicopter, failing to make an emergency call sooner, failing to use the survival equipment in Kerstin's bag, and leaving her exposed to the elements without adequate shelter or warmth. Their central argument was this: Thomas Plamberger, as the significantly more experienced climber, bore a leadership role and responsibility for this outing. He wasn't just a fellow adventurer. He was, in effect, acting as a guide, and he had failed in every critical moment. Under Austrian law, the relevant legal concept here is called Führer aus Gefälligkeit, which translates roughly to leader acting as a courtesy. It had been established some years before in an earlier civil case where an experienced climber brought a less experienced friend on a climb that resulted in injury. And the principle holds that when you are the more experienced person who effectively organizes and leads a dangerous activity, you carry responsibility for the safety of that person that you bring along. And this was the principle that would ultimately determine Thomas Plamberger's fate. It was February 19th, 2026 at the Innsbruck Regional Court. The trial lasted for 14 hours. A single exhausting day of testimony. Judge Norbert Hofer himself, an experienced mountain rescuer, he presided over the case. 15 witnesses took the stand. And 2 expert witnesses, one in alpinism and the other in forensic medicine, they gave evidence, GPS data, sports watch logs, phone records, webcam footage, all placed before the court. And Thomas Plamberger, he pleaded not guilty. He told the court the climb had been planned jointly. Every decision was made together. He said, I didn't lead the tour. I was not in the lead role. He claimed he had no formal alpine training. He described himself merely as a self-taught person, learning mostly from online videos. He was, in his own telling, just a passionate amateur who got in over his head on a tragic night. It was a very well-constructed defense, and then the prosecution, well, they had something up their sleeve because they called their surprise witness. An ex-girlfriend is called to the witness stand, and she told the court that Thomas Plamberger had once left her alone on a mountain too. And guess what? You'll guess. It's the same mountain, the Grossglockner. It was 2 years earlier, in 2023, Thomas had taken her on a climb of the same peak. And when things went wrong, he left her there and descended without her. Great guy. She survived, but her experience climbing with Thomas Plamberger clearly left a mark. And so she came forward, she sat down at the stand, and she said it. And you can imagine the atmosphere in that courtroom, the people leaning forward to hear her every word. This was no longer a story about a terrible night wherein a young woman loses her life. This was now a pattern. This was about a man who had, on the same mountain, in similar circumstances, had made the same choice. And only one of the women had lived. So in the courtroom, as you can really imagine, this is about the future of this young man. The defense pushed back. They argued that Kerstin was no fragile victim. Her own mother, Gertrude, she testified in writing that her daughter was a capable, experienced athlete who would not have gone along blindly with her boyfriend. She did mountain runs and summited mountains far more difficult than this one. Her parents wrote this. And they also went on to say, we can't blame her boyfriend. It was a remarkable, agonizing thing for a mother to say. Just put yourself in that position. You're almost saying it's really not his fault whatsoever, is what she was saying about Thomas. But Gertrude Gurtner was not there to destroy him. Her main intent was to essentially preserve and defend her daughter's legacy. And so she said, my child was not weak and she was not naive. But none of that changes what happened on the mountain that night. And after 11 hours, after one of the longest days an Austrian courtroom has seen in recent memory, Judge Hofner delivered his verdict, guilty. Thomas Plamberger was guilty of grossly negligent manslaughter. Thomas Plamberger's sentence, it's complicated. So he received a 5-month suspended prison sentence, meaning he will not go to jail provided he commits no further offenses over a 3-year probation period. He was also fined 9,600 pounds, which is about $11,300 US. That's it. And now, to be fair to the judge, he did not give Thomas Plamberger a verdict of murder. I mean, manslaughter isn't even close. Judge Hofner was explicit about that, and he said, I don't see you as a murderer. I don't see you as a cold-hearted man. I see you as the one who ultimately tried to call help and stand by his girlfriend. I don't know. What do you think? He acknowledged that Thomas had misguided the situation badly, repeatedly, fatally, but that he had not willfully left Kerstin to die. His lawyers filed an appeal almost immediately after the verdict, as did the public prosecutor's office, apparently seeking a harsher sentence. Go figure, both sides are dissatisfied. Thomas Plamberger, to me, from the outside, it seems, might have felt like he got away with one. And as we leave it now, this case is still to be determined. I just want to step back from the legal details for just a moment, because the case has opened up a conversation that goes far beyond one couple on one mountain on one tragic night. It forces the mountaineering world to ask, when you bring someone up a mountain, what do you owe them? Everybody should be listening out there, especially people interested in hiring a guide. But also, if you're not a guide and you're more experienced than the person that you call your partner on a climbing expedition, you might want to think twice, because if something goes wrong, you could be held responsible. Not just from a moral standpoint, but from a legal standpoint. The mountains don't care about liability. Kerstin Gurtner, she trusted Thomas Plamberger. She believed he knew what he was doing. She believed that he would bring her home safely. And she told him, according to his own account, go on your own and save your own life. Whether she truly said those words, or whether this is the story he needed to tell himself, we'll never know. What we know is that she was 33 years old. She was fit. She was adventurous, full of life. She had an emergency bivouac sleeping bag in her backpack that was never opened. That a rescue helicopter flew directly over her while she was still alive. And that her telephone was placed on silent. And that same man who had made the same choice 2 years earlier on the same mountain, he walked away anyway. So right now, as I'm making this video, the case remains unresolved. Both appeals, they've been filed, and the final verdict, the final sentence, will be determined by a higher Austrian court, and the process could take months. And Thomas Plamberger, he remains free pending the appeal. One thing I'm sure we can all agree on is Kerstin Gurtner, she deserved better. And I'd like to know what you think. Please take a moment to leave your comment in the section below, and let's get this conversation going. This is a case that will truly make you think. And if you're still watching and haven't yet subscribed to Everest Mystery, please take a moment to do so now. And I think you might appreciate the Truth is Out There t-shirts for Everest Mystery, these organic cotton t-shirts that you can find over on the merch page at everestmystery.com. In the meantime, do a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you. Hey, I want to say thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring today's video. You can get a 14-day free trial by using the link in the description below.